I think you know that in England and in Scotland, there's no need to choose a nuptial agreement and there's no default position. In Francesca's country, in Italy, there is a default position and you must choose a nuptial agreement. How does that work for you in Switzerland, Katja?
Well, you don't have to choose, because we have a statutory marital property regime. So if you don't choose anything, then the participation in acquired property, that's the rule, okay? So anything that you have before marriage will remain yours, and anything that you acquire during marriage is subject to a split if, you know, the marriage ends either by divorce or by death, right? So in the nuptial agreement, you can choose either the separation of property, or you can customize the participation in acquired property a little bit to your needs. And there's a third option. You can choose the community of property, which is very rare, that everything that you own is, you know, it's both, you know, it's the property of both. So that's very unusual. It used to be more, I think, in earlier times. And if you have like a farm or farmland, so this might make sense. But in today's times, it doesn't make any sense to declare everything both as, you know, everything's it's both to both of you, of us. So the default position is actually something that's considered fair by the law. Okay, so everything that you acquire during marriage, you should split, share, but you don't have to. You can even make an agreement later on when you get divorced and not split it. But, you know, that's a decision that you can make later on.
So the default position is covered by statute, effectively.
Yes.
And sorry, Francesca, were you?
Sorry, just to make sure. Also, this is the same in Italy. You don't have to choose. There is a default system that would operate in any case if the couple doesn't make a choice, which is, as in Switzerland, the regime by which whatever is acquired after marriage is to be shared. You maintain ownership of what you had before or what you receive by donation or by inheritance. Otherwise, it is shared. I think it's very similar. And the only choice you can make, you cannot customize, as Katja was saying, but you can choose the separation of assets. And that is a choice that you can make at the moment of the marriage, or you could make during marriage, and that would change what happens before. And that has to be a notarized agreement.
In England, we have a totally discretionary system. So assets that you had before, assets that were inherited, they could all become part of a marital disagreement. And that's different to Scotland, isn't it, Kath?
Yes, absolutely. We have our default positions contained in the Family Law Act 1985. And basically what that does is it says that all assets which have been acquired by the efforts of one or both of the parties during the course of the marriage are matrimonial, with the exception of gifts from third parties and also inheritances, which means that we've got very, very finite cut-off points. So date of marriage, date of separation, all assets are valued at date of separation as well. So that you separate in 2015, you don't deal with, you know, a separation agreement or a divorce until 2021. The cut-off date for all valuations is 2015, apart from the matrimonial home, which is valid as at the date of divorce. So we are, you know, our system is actually pretty rigid anyway, so that, you know, oftentimes, you know, people don't really bother with prenups because they know that assets they have pre-marriage, any inherited wealth, and also any gifts they get from parents, for example, will not be part of the pot. Where it becomes a bit problematic is basically life tends to get in the way. And what people always do is they say, right, okay, I'm not just keeping this inherited £100,000 to one side. what I'm going to do is we're going to buy a new family home, we're going to make it bigger and better, or I'm going to apply the money to renovations. And of course, once you do that and you change the nature of the inherited wealth, it becomes matrimonial. So really for us, what we try to do, I think, with prenup agreements is we try to avoid that situation. So any transmutation of non-matrimonial property into matrimonial, that's really what our prenups are designed to protect. So any increase in value, say for example, in a house, over the course of the marriage, we would say that was kept out. So what you tend to find with lots of our prenups is that there's a big schedule at the back, which details all the assets that were there before marriage, all the assets that might be inherited, and we list that all of those assets are exempt, and also that the free proceeds of those assets and any assets that those assets then purchase are also out of the pot.
We do that too sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
And Susan, how does it work in California?
In California, the default is California law, which is similar to what Kath was just speaking of. We are a community property state. So what I find is that particularly with younger people that are coming to me now, the idea of community property where, you know, everything that's a product of your efforts during your marriage, whether that's your paycheck, a contribution to your retirement account, you know, creating a work of art, any of those things that you create from your date of marriage to your date of separation, that is community property. And for the trend that I see is that younger couples, that doesn't make sense to them. And so often what I will do in an agreement is that the couple will want everything that's a product of their efforts during their marriage to remain their separate property. And then they will have a joint account that they put their money into. That joint account, it's separate property. When it goes into that joint account is designated as community property. So everything that comes out of it that they buy is community property. So they use that account very often for paying their expenses that they agree upon. And some people are very particular about what joint expenses are, and some people are not. But whatever they put into that account, if they, for example, wanted to buy something, a vehicle or whatever it is that they wanted to purchase, and they wanted it to be community property, they would buy that out of that account. So the money that goes in is separate, it comes out, it's community. And that's something that people often do. Also, a premarital agreement in California, if you have something before marriage, it's your separate property. It remains your separate property. If you have income that flows from that property, even during your marriage, it remains separate property. If you take your separate property and you buy something new during marriage with that money, as long as everything is kept separate, it remains separate property. But sometimes what happens, for example, is let's say someone comes into the marriage and they have a home and it is their separate property. If they start paying down the mortgage and paying the principal down on the mortgage, or if they make improvements to the property with their earnings, now what you have is a situation in which community property has been contributed to this separate property, and now you have a mixed asset, and this is where things become more confusing. The situation with, when are things valued is very similar to what Kath described, and that is, a home, if you have something and it also holds true for if there's a debt, if they have a credit card, for example, we would look at their credit card statement and say, okay, here's the date of separation. Anything that is before, if it's a living expense, it would be a community expense, and after would be a separate expense. All of that becomes mixed up with, duties of support and all that stuff. But technically speaking, it would be anything that is a product of your efforts that you acquire after separation would then again be your separate property. So sometimes this becomes complicated. Sometimes people will come to a marriage and they have a retirement account, say, before marriage, then they contribute to it during marriage, and then let's say their marriage isn't that long, or maybe it is, but now they're contributing to it after their date of separation. Then it becomes quite a mix. But we have qualified domestic relations orders that we do that make that really can make that a lot simpler to deal with. So it can be complicated, and sometimes what people do is, to avoid all that complication, they want a prenuptial agreement or a postnuptial agreement, just to clarify things so that everybody feels more at ease. And in California, frankly, prenuptial agreements are the courts like them because it makes things simpler. If people do divorce, they have a plan that they've come up with, and is more specific than, perhaps the vagueness of the law. And when you're talking about these mixed assets, things can get quite complicated, as I mentioned.